Attorney Fani Willis brought a racketeering indictment against Donald Trump and his co-defendants. We've talked a lot about Georgia's particularly expansive version of that RICO law. It creates real legal peril for the ex-president's co-conspirators, and it seems to be an appropriate tool to use against the transgression of their illegitimate and fundamentally unlawful project to overturn the election. The very breadth of that law can be a real double-edged sword, as people in Georgia, particularly defense attorneys, will be among the first to tell you. We got an example of that yesterday, when the very same grand jury that indicted Donald Trump also indicted 61 community activists and others, many of whom were attempting to stop the construction of a new police training facility. Now, some of the people involved in that have been accused of specific crimes, like throwing Molotov cocktails at police, for example, or approaching officers with weapons in a threatening manner. But what this application of Georgia's RICO statute does is that it also rolls up a whole bunch of people who did things like get a $62 reimbursement for food and a $12 reimbursement for glue as part of the conspiracy. These people are now looking at 5 years in prison, raising a whole lot of concern from legal experts and civil libertarians. I mean, Cheryl Eiffel, former president of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, wrote today, quote, "These charges against Stop Cop City activists and bail fund organizers by the Georgia Attorney General threaten democratic activism and effective organizing." Josie Duffy Rice is a lawyer and criminal justice reporter based in Atlanta. She's been very closely following this case, and she's the host of the podcast Unreformed, which is phenomenal, by the way, and she joins me now. Josie, first, I mean, the backstory here is there's been a long fight about this police training facility. Opponents call it Cop City. There's a battle right now to get a petition certified to have a citywide referendum, but sort of independent of the substance of that, right? There's been arrests of the folks, many of whom are anarchists, many of whom are avowed leftists and abolitionists who have occupied the forest and things like that. Okay, fine. People get arrested for direct action. What is different about this indictment?
Well, this indictment is an ridiculously broad use of the RICO statute to punish protesters for legal action, and in some ways not even for real action, like you said, for buying glue, for getting food reimbursement. You know, there's a legal observer who was jailed while monitoring protests, right? Activists who ran a bail fund have been punished. This is basically just a way to explicitly silence protesters, deter them from using their First Amendment constitutional protections, and keep the fight against Cop City from really gaining more momentum as it has in Atlanta in the past few months.
So even on the technical part of the law here, I mean, it always seemed to me, you know, one of the complaints of folks like Mark Meadows, like, oh, it's illegal to make phone calls now. It's like, well, you know, there are acts that people can take that are legal in a RICO charge, but everyone has to have committed at least one criminal act. But in these cases, like, the actual individual criminal acts didn't scan to me. Like, I guess for some reason the bail fund is, but it really seems like they are trying to get people to go to 5 years in prison for, like, contributing to a bail fund, which just seems facially not okay.
That's right. I mean, like, the truth is that the RICO statute in Georgia is broader than the federal RICO statute. And the federal RICO statute was brought under Nixon. It is pretty broad, Chris. Like, it's not a joke, right? And here in Georgia, like, you can be criminal, overt acts that would not be criminal on their own can suddenly become criminal under the Georgia RICO statute. You can be conspiring with people that you don't even know you're conspiring with, right? And it's basically just a tool to get people to plead guilty and testify against other people, so that you get 1 or 2 hits, you know, as a prosecutor. It's a reminder that, you know, when someone that we think is actually worth prosecuting is prosecuted under one of these statutes, they seem like a great tool of law enforcement. But in actuality, they're used as weapons against people who have a lot less power than Donald Trump.
Well, one of the things that I think is quite distinct between the two is that the thing that was being pursued in the alleged conspiracy of Donald Trump was itself unlawful. Like, overturning the election...
You can't overturn democracy.
Right, like, overturning the election, it was unlawful. There was no lawful means to do it, right? saying that you want to stop a police training facility happening. Now, there's many different tactics people can use for that, lawful or unlawful.
Right.
But that itself isn't unlawful. That's politics.
No.
People try to stop things from getting built all the time, all across this great country of ours all the time. I mean, to your point about the legal observer, Thomas Jurgens, this is what the indictment says about him. It says, on or about March 5th, Thomas Jurgens did join an organized mob and succeeded in overwhelming the police force, thereby aiding and abetting the offense of arson, domestic terrorism, attempt to occupy the DeKalb Forest, prevent the building of the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center. This is an overt act and furthers the conspiracy. We should note that he's a staff attorney at the Southern Poverty Law Center. And his own lawyer said he wore a bright green hat, a well-known identifier used by legal observers. He's saying he was there as a legal observer, and they're charging him in this as part of the conspiracy.
Yeah, I mean, they're playing fast and very loose with the truth in this indictment. It is sloppy. It is political propaganda. It's not a very strong legal document. They don't even get who owns the forest correct, right? Which is a pretty key part if you're bringing charges against people for trespassing in the forest. This is partisan propaganda. This is a way of sticking it to people who are using the RICO statute against Donald Trump. It is a way of punishing people who are going against law enforcement. And it is a way of silencing protesters. I mean, these are the people who say, fight the government. But this is what happens when you fight the government.
Yeah, we should know.
Or even push back against them slightly.
When you talk about it, if people read the document, there's this long discourse on the nature of anarchism. It talks about like mutual aid and social solidarity as being these sort of like nefarious code words for what they're up to.
Yeah.
This is the Times quoting a legal observer. Some observers found it unusual prosecutors gave a detailed definition and criticism of anarchism as an ideology. It seems like an indictment of an ideological disposition as much as identifiable criminal acts, said Anthony Michael Kreis, who's a constitutional law expert at Georgia State University. We should also note, in terms of who brought this, DeKalb County DA Sherry Boston, who's been this program, withdrew from criminal cases on this. This seems to be the Attorney General, Christopher Carr, is the Republican Attorney General. He's behind this prosecution.
He's behind it, and Sherry Boston actually said she wasn't going to go forward with this because it is so light, it is so unsubstantiated, and it is so clearly a way of telling Georgia, look, you bring charges against a man for trying to overturn democracy, the former president, and we will bring charges against the powerless for exercising their basic constitutional right. Yep.
Yes, the act goes on purpose. Josie Duffy.
Absolutely.
That was great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
That is all in on this Wednesday night. Alex Wagner tonight starts right now. Good evening, Alex.
Chris, we will have Sherry Boston, that DeKalb prosecutor, on in the next hour of television.
You should ask her about this indictment. I'm curious to hear what she says.
We just may. There's there's a flip side to having a vast and aggressive interpretation of Georgia's RICO statute, and that is it.
Tools can be used in different ways.
That is very true, my friend. Thank you as always.